right, guys. We got the Ben and Ryan show. Charvi's rocking out on the guitar. Man, we got the whole crew rocking today. This is a very special episode. Today we are joined by, you can see on the screen if you're watching, but if you're listening to it, we're joined by Brian Sappey. He's CTO of Semify, and Charvi Dhoot. Did I get that last name right? Okay.
Yeah.
She is Senior Product Manager over at Adobe ColdFusion, and we're going to be talking about CF2025 and how the sausage is made. And as always, I'm joined by the yang to my yin, the introvert to my extrovert, Mr. Ben Nadel.
Always glad to be here.
Ben, welcome. I prepared an opening this time.
So it's for everybody. So even for vegetarians as well as non-vegetarians.
There you go. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are here to kind of with the CF 2025 about to be released here in a couple months, the beta already out there. We wanted to kind of do a different twist on things because I've seen the webinars already out about the features, and so this one we want to kind of get some behind the scenes and see how that sausage is made. How do we come up with the new features? So Charvi, I'll kind of pass it to you to kind of start here. What are the different areas that you guys look for to find new feature requests, bug fixes, any ideas about stuff?
Got it. So a couple of areas for us are literally the pillars for ColdFusion. For example, when it comes to language features, stability, security, performance, these are pretty much the pillars for us where we definitely have certain ideas that we start putting together when it's the new release getting planned. And then, of course, it's also about the different libraries that we have in ColdFusion already existing, as well as what new libraries can be introduced. For example, in 23, we introduced the GraphQL integration. So it's kind of like that in the sense of what is it that's going to add the most amount of value to people who are building applications using ColdFusion. And the way to understand also with regards to how do we detect that value is to talk to a lot of customers, understand all the enhancement requests that have been uploaded into the system over the years and where and what pain points people have been facing, which areas people are facing on, what libraries people are using more extensively, and then putting together a prioritization in terms of what we should be building for the next release. So that's a little bit of a high-level overview. We can get into details as well as we go along the podcast.
Okay. Now, Brian, you were involved in kind of a customer interview. How did all of that start, Brian? Did you raise your hand and say, "Hey, Charvi, I got a great idea," or did she come to you from a feature request you put out there? Can you kind of tell us that story and kind of how did you come up with your idea and why were you pushing that one so hard?
Yeah, no, great question. I think I've pinged Charvi and a few others several times about some crazy ideas, and this one actually stuck. But the security, Charvi mentioned, she touched on one of the foundational items, right? So security is always obviously at the forefront of a lot of decisions I think you have to make when you're looking at security enhancements or just application developments. And so, building CRMs, ERPs, user stores are primarily a big concern of, data breach. You see it all the time, internal, external threats, but really making sure that your users' data is secure. But really where it opens up some bigger risks are external users, and being able to seamlessly integrate them into your system without having to manage that risk, to me, is a really attractive option when architecting out a platform, especially at enterprise level. And so the idea thrown over to Charvi was, hey, we did this really cool integration with Azure as a user store, and we were able to seamlessly integrate it directly into ColdFusion applications that were not only powering internal usage but external as well, really mitigating a large risk of data breach, but then actually opening the door. One of the really cool features of it, but we were able to integrate directly with any third-party provider, especially in the Microsoft ecosystem, where they could continue to use their own authentication methods through Azure at their own company and still be able to transition with a single sign-on directly into ours. So obviously the the benefits there are vast. We could go into details on them, but having that as an offering as part of the next release, I thought was a good one from not only usability standpoint, scale and security, but I think it had value. I've sent a few over there to her, and obviously they might be one-offs. So, and I'm glad some of them, she said no because the usage has dropped. But as we know, Microsoft has obviously a very high saturation point in the market. So I was pretty confident that wasn't going anywhere, and I did think it provided a lot of value, not having to custom write those SDKs yourself or creating endpoint integrations, which for some teams might be a bit challenging and time consuming. But she opened the arms and took the request in. We had a few other meetings and spoke with some of the engineers and provided some pseudo examples of code and some high level concepts of where I thought it could go, and then also what we were currently using and exercising out of it. And the idea made it to a production state.
Nice. And so this was something that you guys had developed on your own, and you're like, hey, I think that the overall CF community could use this. And
that's right.
And it should be baked into the code.
Exactly. And I think if any of us have reviewed Microsoft documentation, it can be a bit challenging depending on which version and which updated document you see. And I think just even for the graph, MS graph integrations, you could find 4 different documents of how to integrate with it. So there was a lot of sweat equity that was put in discovery early on, where I think, it could have been a large barrier to cross as an entry point to be able to do it on your own. And so we used a lot of the concepts that we had built, and then also the conceptual design moving forward, like where we thought it could go, like all the integration points. Once you open the 365 door into the Microsoft platform, now you've got access in the emails. You could look at, helping to build out a CRM for communications. You've got all the reports. You've got all the other products in the ecosystem that start to scale up very quickly. And once you open that door and that integration point, there's a lot of opportunity for enhancing your ColdFusion applications. And so by making this a direct integrating point connector, I think it encourages ColdFusion developers and engineers to open the door for more and more powerful integrations, which to me just furthers the benefit of the product, right? Like you're basically saying, hey, ColdFusion is just the engine behind the scenes. Look at this. There's nothing we can't talk to, and there's nothing that we can integrate with. So from the surface level, nobody really had a clue that it was ColdFusion was the powering app underneath. When we rolled it out, they just saw that the Microsoft Azure login hit them with the 2FA check, securely dropped into the app, but really it was ColdFusion doing all the magic behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Ben and I just had a podcast a few weeks ago with Justin Scott, and we talked about kind of different authorization techniques out there, like doing your own authorization versus using 2FA from any of the other people or Azure AD. So it's interesting to kind of talk to you guys about this is one that you've now built into ColdFusion. One quick follow-up on this one, because I know Justin mentioned that he was writing some encryption piece, and there's been some chatter. I don't want to put Charvi on the spot here, but some chatter about some sort of a store where outside developers can post their own little their own applications that they make, or their own plugins to ColdFusion. And that way, someone, like if Brian created something like that, or Brian's team at Semify created something, they could post that out there, maybe open source it, but it's kind of one community place where these things could go to. So not putting Charvi on the spot to say how you're going to do it, but just this is another example of something that could have been there, and could also be a source for you guys for things you want to bring in. So if there was this store out there, you guys could see that store and say, hey, look, these are things that other people are developing. Maybe it's something we can now actually bring into the code. So just something I thought about as Brian was talking.
So Ryan, part of my job is being very careful about like where we spend our resources. So that definitely is there, where we understand like, okay, how is it we go about, what is it that we should build? So the underlying architecture is there, where we have a package manager for ColdFusion now. We have the core and the libraries. And if we were to enable a way for external packages to also come in, via the package manager, in terms of the installation itself, it would be possible to do something of that sort, definitely. The consideration, however, to make is the way I would approach this is to understand how many people are ready to put out apps like these that could be added back into the ColdFusion, where such applications are going to get listed, and then we can have ColdFusion people start using them. So that's what I would do towards building that, and definitely is one of the story items. It's one of the research items that went into our ideathon also. We had an ideathon internally. So it was one of the ideas that got a focus. We will do some research around that. Same thing with which we did with MS Graph also. Just to explain to you the customer interview process that went about even behind the scenes for MS Graph integration. So let's say Brian came up saying, well, our authentication method should definitely support integration with Azure because it's a very extensive library out there to support anybody who's using MS365 applications for building their, for interacting or building their applications also, right? So from that perspective, then we go about understanding how many people would need this. What would they need the most? So MS Graph is extensive. So you would have even spreadsheets, even calendar, mail, so many other things that you could interface via and build a ColdFusion function for, or a framework for also for those functions, right? But we prioritize the user store so much because we saw that became like a common denominator across customers with regards to different applications and different needs that they had. Not just that, when you're looking to build on cloud, you need a cloud user store as well, right? And that's perfectly there. We did research into the Google Cloud Store as well. We researched into the Okta Cloud Store as well, but we realized that Azure is more extensively used by the community. So we went ahead and gave that integration first. And we did throw out ideas saying, like, if people need this, they can come back to us and tell us. So you would see a lot of posts historically on the community from my side to get into that. Now, coming back to the feature that you're talking about, which is on the package manager, do we build something of an interface where people can drop in their applications and have our package manager integrate with that so that people could install it? People have visibility into what different plugins are being developed by the community. Definitely something that we would like to do as long as people are building those plugins. So the first thing that I would do in this regards is if people are very much interested in putting out their plugins and also wanting to price their plugins, for example, where it becomes a monetization opportunity as well for people, then we could look into enabling that, interface for folks to be able to upload their plugins and for us to be able to have a seamless installation and integration with that so that it's easier for people to just bring in those plugins and start using them in CF. So it all depends on how much traction does the idea get from the community and the customers.
See, Ryan, I think I killed the plugin store for everybody. Charvi looked at it and said, "No, we're going to be writing this internally from this point on." So I do apologize.
I mean,
it was the starting point.
Hey, sorry for that cough here, guys. You can see my little tagline. I still have a cold I got from my Thanksgiving travels. But yeah, ColdFusion could be the next Apple. They could have the next app store out there. They could be fighting antitrust claims. I mean, imagine, Charvi, imagine the antitrust claims if you guys.
Yeah, I feel part of Adobe has a developer platform. I went into those. So those are 2 hour long meetings where they host, tell us what's being built internally for other products, for example, just to see what toolings that I could leverage internally as well to build this. So I've done all of that, or I've tried to explore that over the years that I've been part of ColdFusion so far. It's just about when you put down the release together, it's about what do you prioritize the most, which is going to get the most amount of adoption for customers and going to solve the most amount of pain points as well. So that being the case, in this case, it would be a study of how many people are ready to put out their plugins. Do they need a pricing feature there? And things like those. It would be very interesting if we could get that in. Because honestly speaking, package managers and then plugins are the ways, and also the monetization opportunity for people works both ways, right? So if you have a ready-made plugin, you don't have to build it. And also for the person who's built it, it's a good opportunity. It could be open source and they could provide consultation on extending the functionality in the feature set for those plugins as well. I mean, it could be anything that they would like to do, but it's just that's the way typically ecosystems also grow. So it's definitely a very interesting idea for us.
I love the idea. I think it's a great entry. I would absolutely think there's opportunity to contribute in something like that. So at least try it, right? It could even be a try to get an idea started that might pick up enough steam to where it becomes a fully integrated feature. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for people involved.
We could end the podcast right here. We've great idea. We get to Charvi. We put pressure on her.
I'll go over to the tracker right now.
One of the hard things that I think maybe doesn't get discussed enough in terms of when we think about Adobe moving forward with certain ideas, or why are they not moving forward with certain things? They are moving forward with other things. Is that ColdFusion is a fairly high-level language. Obviously, you can do a lot of low-level things with it, but it provides a lot of DHH, David Hannemeyer Hansen, creator of Ruby on Rails, uses a phrase conceptual compression. And I think one of the really nice things that ColdFusion does is it provides a lot of conceptual compression around things that are fairly complicated. Like when I make a database query, I'm not thinking about database connection pools and timeouts. I just have SQL and I provide a little bit of configuration and it just works. So I think the challenge probably for a lot of the things for the Adobe side of the house is how do we take an idea that's very complicated if you were going to build it yourself and boil it down to a set of baked in, let's say, opinions that the platform itself has, but then also provide ways to tweak and configure it in a way where the complexity of the underlying idea isn't leaking out as this like leaky abstraction into what the user has to deal with. And I think that's probably a very challenging thing to think about, especially when you're dealing with such challenging integrations like this, the MS365 Azure stuff. I mean, it's got to be a tremendous amount of complexity there.
The biggest philosophical discussion that always comes up in each discussion is tags versus script. So, I mean, that's all. I mean, I know externally people talk about it, but almost every time we start with this, so it's going to be like all fingers at me, and then say, do we have to support tags for this or not? And I'm always in the spot because, you have to like do two levels of implementations then,
right?
Just as one feature.
You do have a large following who love tags.
I'm surprised about that. Like even when I was looking at the 2025 beta documentation, there's a lot of tag demonstration of code, and I'm always surprised when I see that these days. I mean, I think, to be very clear, I'm not an anti-tag person. I think tags are wonderful and they provide a lot of value, especially in the view layer where you're integrating server-side data with what you're going to render to the client. But I am always surprised when I see more what I would consider prototypically back-end code that still is presented as tags.
Charvi, how do you answer that question?
I'm not answering that question.
But well, I'm curious.
So most of the tags came in for CF charts, I believe. So that's something that's obviously the front end side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But go ahead, Ben. You were saying something, and then I can complete.
No, I just have it's the trouble with any language or any platform is that you have the innovations that you want to have going forward, but then you also have this deep history of codified patterns. And you sort of, as a team, have to figure out where you're going to stick with a pattern because it's what people expect, and where you're going to break free from that pattern because maybe it opens up a new kind of a ergonomic or approach to doing things. And I look at something like, I mean, this is a silly example maybe, but you can take a query object that comes back from the database and you can perform a for-in iteration over it. And behind the scenes, ColdFusion is taking that query and it's converting it on the fly into an array of structs or whatever it does. And so each iteration gives you a struct. And that's a very, again, a specific opinion that the platform has to have on how they're going to allow that to happen. There's a lot of these like little fine-grained details that the team probably has to do a lot of hand-wringing over about. Is this the right way to do it? Is this the quote-unquote ColdFusion way to do it? Or are we going to make a new pattern? Is it going to jive with the way people think about the platform? Or are they going to have to adapt? it's a very challenging thing, and I don't think people give the team enough credit for how challenging it is.
Yeah, I will throw out another example out there. The Microsoft years ago with their Office suite, they got a lot of slack for changing to the ribbon layout. I don't know if you guys all remember back in the Office days, it was just menus before, and then they introduced the actual like, GUI interface to getting access to everything. People are like, oh, I'll never be able to find my cut and my copy or whatever, my bold anymore because it's in this crazy ribbon, and now everyone is just used to clicking on stuff.
That happens with our documentation a lot. So sorry, just saying.
Yeah. So I see the same thing as people are trying to move to script, but you're like, okay, hey, there's these people who still love their menus. So you kind of have to continue to support that. I mean, I think the alt keys and Word still work. So if you want to do like certain combinations to do things, you can do that. I even learned an Excel one recently to center something across multiple cells, but without doing the merge and center. So that was really cool. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true. So Ryan, like anytime you introduce something different in something which people are very, very used to, for example, even when they changed the Outlook design, I was like, get the old Outlook back. Because the new one,
this is ridiculous.
Yeah, but with ColdFusion also it happens pretty much because more so because it's a developer framework. If you don't get the documentation correctly, if you do not understand how to utilize the functions that have been built, then you're kind of lost. Even then, and also if let's say you have been a tag user and then now you see all the script functions coming in, then again it's like a bummer for you because you're so used to the tags ecosystem, which is a lot of people, by the way, from whatever I have seen. Yeah, because
us too. As we migrate people to the XBite cloud, we see a lot of people with tag code still.
Yeah, because see, philosophically, what happened was like we wanted dynamic websites, so we built something like a database integration, and then we had CF query as a tag. Now that concept can be extended to anything, which is even documents, right, or even spreadsheets. And I mean, take any data format, it could be extended to that. So now there's nothing wrong in doing a tag-based approach as such in the yesteryears, for example, especially when HTML was more popular. But as you move towards the more script-based ecosystem, then it's like, okay, the backend also has to look similar. So you go towards the more script-based approach. But what do you do with all the old code that exists? So
what do you do with all the old code?
Yeah, so how do you convince people to say now there are only script functions? So if you're a tag user and you have this nice looking tag code, which Ben, if I don't know if Ben remembers though, Ben specifically made this point. So I interviewed Ben maybe in my third month or so into the company for language features. He did mention tag islands, and also we're going to obviously talk about that. Okay, but then Ben was like, listen, you know what? My code doesn't look nice when you guys do scripts. I have this tag-based code, for example, right? But if you're doing the script-based code, then yes, obviously. So when we were having that discussion of tags versus scripts, even then in that interview, so should we support the tag-based version for a certain function or not?
So let me bring this up here. I'm gonna. So here's the tracker in case anyone is not familiar with it. It's tracker.adobe.com. Me not being a developer, I want to put that out there. So in case you're looking at the issues I've created and the issues I've voted for, they are. I should not have probably started on my dashboard because it's not a good showing to everybody. But I will go out there and vote for a couple of them. And one of the ones, if in case you're looking for something, here is the tag islands that they talked about. So it's 4211437. We'll put the link here in the show notes for everybody.
Well, Ben, this is a specific case where you say my code doesn't look nice when you don't give me tag islands to put in my, or in this case, obviously to like even enable CF query within, because CF query is such an important usage for tags as well. So
and here's where we give Ben a hard time is that he talked to Charlie about tag islands, but if you see the number of votes for this particular,
we were having this nice rooftop party after the conference, you know. And then everyone's having a great time. CF Summit 2024 in Vegas. And then Ben and I are talking. And then Ben's like, and I'm talking about like, you know, like obviously what's happening with the product and things like that. And then suddenly Ben is like, you know, in his dreamland. And then Ben is like, you know what? I've always wondered, it would be so nice if there were tag islands. So I'm like, okay. So yeah.
So Ryan, you can break the seal. Go ahead and vote for that.
Here we go. So now
Nice.
there we go. Oh wait, you can't vote for a bug you created.
You
I
created
did.
this?
I did it.
Uh-oh.
It's from 2021. This is
I
before
think there's
my
a bug in the
time.
bug tracker.
I think we found it.
Oh my God. Did you it's not possible that Ryan created this bug.
I mean, not from 2021. I wasn't around in CF world.
Can you just like refresh and see what happens? But yeah, there is a bug in the bug tracker, looks like in that case.
That's why we don't do live demos.
Yeah, we'll take care of this in post processing.
Let's see if I can vote for it now.
Yeah, that's why I didn't vote for this.
Oh, look, it's doing something. Oh, there we go. I refreshed
there you go.
Dang. Called out.
So yeah, so if you get that bug, refresh the page, and then do it again. So now votes is 1, and if I refresh my dashboard, again, live
once Ben
demos.
votes for it, then also
There we go.
Nice. All right, I'll go and
obviously
vote for it.
we have like a separate tracker just to like track Ben's issues. Just saying.
Reflection on the product.
I'm just kidding.
So guys, so for all of you guys out there watching, so I did this little experiment and talking about live demos of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do this search. I'm looking for new feature requests in the last 2 years. We're going to execute this search. Hopefully I don't have to refresh, but I'll give you a little preview. It should show here in about a minute, about a few seconds here. About 80 of these, 8. There's 10 per page, 8 pages of it. So 80 feature requests. That's not bad for the last 2 years for a product. So 80 feature requests is pretty good. But now I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, show me ones with more than 1 vote. And so it's doing its little spinning here, and it only shows 1 page back. And I already counted these. These are full 10 of these. So 10 out of 80.
The first one is mine. Allow use of var and template.
Oh,
heck yeah!
That was just created, and it's already got more than 1 vote.
Toy.
So guys, for those listening and watching, okay, 10 out of 8, and being a math person, that's 12%. 1/8 of these have more than 1 vote. So if you want to see your stuff, things that you care about, like tag islands, everybody, get in, vote. That's how you get stuff in. So that's a little like public service announcement. The more you know, and have a little with a little star go across our screen or something.
Let me ask maybe a controversial question here. So I was looking through the notes, and I see that struct value array is a method that's finally been added to the language. And as an Adobe ColdFusion user, I've built a struct value array user-defined function many times over in various contexts. It's 4 lines of code or something behind the scenes. How much latitude and freedom do the ColdFusion engineers have to see something like that and be like, you know what, I'm just going to write that on Friday. And it doesn't matter if it's on the roadmap. It's just going to be, I know it's 10 lines of code that I have to write. We have so much prior art relating to struct and array iteration. This is just going to be something easy I can knock out. Is that kind of a ground up approach to development something that is facilitated, or is it a very top down roadmap oriented kind of a flow? So
for ColdFusion, as a developer product specifically, we cannot be completely top down. And that's where what happens is we have something like a research phase, which is we dedicate a couple of months into researching, let's say, areas that we've identified where we want to focus on. So if it's a language set, for example, obviously, we are looking at what customers want, and then that's one of the prioritization elements. But you cannot be just focused on what people have asked for. You also need to look at the other ecosystems, or maybe think through what ColdFusion needs, or sometimes when you've been solving customer issues, because we're also, we are a platform which has a very active support. So we look at certain issues and we identify that this would be interesting to introduce into the product because it will solve so many problems. Like, for example, parallelization of certain methods, right? With specifying the number of threads that you can utilize. to, let's say, do an array processing or things like that. That was something that's very unique to like how ColdFusion built it. So those are the things which are very much driven by developers. And then we are part of those discussions where we understand what it is. If we need to get in some customer inputs, then we get into that. And then we figure out who could give us the right inputs, and then, get to maybe creative ways of like doing those surveys or like understanding the research and then putting like saying, yes, go ahead. But a lot of features on ColdFusion are driven by the development team during the research phase to understand like what is to be built.
So is that by a committee, or is there a that runs that, or is there a point person or ownership of certain areas? How does that flow top to bottom?
So the team is kind of divided like that. So everyone has an ownership area, and they hone themselves into that ownership area for many years. So for example, let's say currently the team is doing their training in Gen AI, right? So we're figuring out all sorts of trainings that Adobe can provide, internal or external, to make sure that the team is building the right kind of brain to get into that area. And that's going to take a while until like they get there to be able to build that. Having said that, when it comes to security, there's proper security trainings that the team goes through, the one that's focused on security alone, to build the right background and understanding of how security has to be addressed, and then get into the development. So everyone has like a focus area. It could be like multiple people, or depending on like how many owners we can define for that area and what kind of prioritization that area has. So the number gets defined from that. Let's say a junior team member comes in, and then we assign them a certain area. They're always tagged to a person who's definitely an expert into that area with, let's say, years of experience into it, and then they get into building for that specific module or specific package or specific area.
Now, Charvi, I know when we were talking in the pre-show, in one of our meetings about this, you had mentioned something coming out, or customer advisory boards. How do you guys come up with what topics you want to get people together, and then how are people going to be able to sign up for that?
All right. So one thing that people understand about, especially libraries, and when you build libraries to, let's say, process spreadsheets, for example, let's just take that example. And then let's take a use case of an ERP application, right? And then you would say, okay, my spreadsheet should have processing elements like these. I should be able to put a print guideline onto it, or I should be able to print it and post it into a PDF. So you will build custom functions into a library to be able to do that. And then once the library is built, you're going to utilize it into your application to, libraries are pretty much like what you build as functions, right? At the end of the day, functions that can be utilized by everybody. And then you take those functions into your application and build your application. Now for us, when we are building those libraries, we're not the end consumers of that particular library. It's the customers who are going to be the end consumers. So it's very important for us that when we're building, obviously we look at competitors and we say, well, this looks like an important use case we should prioritize. But it's also equally important to say, when our customers are going to adopt that feature, are they really going to be able to adopt that or not? From that perspective, it's really important to have the customer advisory boards going to get early feedback into what we've built. Is it useful? How is it useful? And things like that. And also, like, ColdFusion has its own philosophical element going, right? Like, have we considered all the use cases? Have we considered the fact that, when we introduce a new function, have we covered all bases with regards to that function? And that's something that you can only know when you start building an application using that library.
Well, that's one of the other very challenging things, I assume, for the ColdFusion team, is that ColdFusion itself is built in Java, which has very different ergonomics than ColdFusion language itself. So I think it's probably another extra layer of challenge to have people both implement a language with one set of ergonomics, but then target a different set of ergonomics. And you really have to be in almost two different mindsets. Otherwise, I think again, going back to this idea of the leaky abstractions and the complexity leaking out into the higher level layer.
So everyone's like an expert Java developer, right? But then everyone who's an expert Java developer needn't be an expert application developer,
right?
Right. So that's where the gap comes in, because like when you're prioritizing, I understand the Java ecosystem really well, but then ColdFusion is all about like that high level language where the abstraction is a lot more. What was the word that you used? That was
Ergonomics.
No, it's the conceptual
compression.
Yeah, conceptual compression. So yeah. So when that's
I look at something. I know that the CSV parsing, comma separated value list parsing is a huge value add for the 2025 release, and I haven't looked at it very specifically yet. But just from what I saw in your presentation at CF Summit, it does look to me, and I don't mean to push back at all, but it does look a little bit like whatever the API being used underneath is feeling like it's bleeding into the ColdFusion a little bit. Like I could imagine that let's say the majority use case is someone wants to create a CSV parser and they just want to do like a for in over the file. In the same way that we were talking about earlier with the ColdFusion query, where you can do a for in over the query, I could imagine someone saying for record in CSV file. And you have to bake in that the ColdFusion, quote unquote, the ColdFusion way is that we can just do the automatic parsing under the hood, and it emits rows, and it's very seamless and ergonomic. But then if you allow the low level implementation details to start expressing themselves maybe too loudly, you can come up with a lot of different file oriented methods where it's almost now like you're calling the Java parser directly, but through a thin ColdFusion layer. And again, it's just like there's so many complexities to how to do it the
correct,
ColdFusion
because
way.
that's another debate that happens in the meetings and discussions also, because like if you don't expose it as is, you're like, have we provided all the functionality that the underlying library was provided or not? And then the other part is, well, if we simplify it too much, then obviously we've not exposed all the functionality. But then the other part is, have we covered the base with regards to how ColdFusion developers or ColdFusion application developers are used to using functions as well? So
100%.
Yeah.
Do you run into the risk too of performance gaps too, right? So if I know I've dipped into just use Java directly several times for larger Ben's point actually on the CSV, parsing over larger data sets where you're even doing string concatenation. In previous versions, if you understood it enough, you could just jump in directly to the Java underlying libraries and use it directly. And there was a pretty large performance benefit for the application. But I would imagine that's a challenge too, right? You can only encapsulate so much and not suffer on the performance side. And is that always considered? And I did wonder as well, do you have any rough numbers on how many ColdFusion users you've received feedback on, how many actually use native Java mixed in? So this is like Tag Island on the other side, low level, but how many of them are using Java on their applications with a mix of CF?
So Brian, I think that feature came in before me, but I did look through a lot of enhancement requests that came in for a Java integration within ColdFusion. So if you can actually use Java within ColdFusion. So it's like a CF Java tag, and then you can like put Java code within it. And also like you have like the class integration also now, which is if you have a Java class and you're integrating with that, I mean, you can utilize that. I feel that when I was doing customer interviews during the framing of the release of 25, I felt that very few people were using Java within ColdFusion. I felt that. But honestly, like, going towards a conference this time around, where, I met with larger customer groups, and then I felt that they were utilizing it a lot more as well. Like, because anytime they're limited, let's say from the framework side, they have the ability to actually just, tap into the Java ecosystem to get something. But I still feel, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing that I was super excited to see in the 2025 beta release notes is that the create object method, which is how we create Java objects historically, now has an optional argument to provide a list of jar file paths. So you can, I assume what it's doing is creating some sort of a class loader behind the scenes and isolating the jar instances. I think if you look at the ticket related to that, it's like 7 years old. So I'm super excited that's in there. I think a lot of people are going to be very excited to see that land in ColdFusion proper.
25 was a lot about like doing a clean So if you see the kind of feature sets, if you look at the security stability side of things also, it's like a clean in the sense 70 plus OEM upgrades. When it was like language ERs this time around, we didn't do any external research. We looked at the system and we said, let's do as much cleaning as possible with regards to all the pending requests so that, we can get that much out. And then we look towards like, building newer things with the future releases. So 25 was a lot about like making sure we had a lot of long pending issues addressed into the system.
Hey, Brian, I have a question for you. And we didn't prep for this, but I just thought of this. And it may be a short question. Were you involved in the alpha of 2025?
No.
Okay. Then never mind. It was a short question. I'll direct it to Charvi then. Charvi, for the alpha customers, how easy is it to upgrade from 2023 or 2021 or one of the prior versions of CF? Is it a pretty easy upgrade? And from what I've been told, it's in the past it's normally an easy upgrade, maybe with the exception of some of the newest security updates recently. But how have customers kind of described the process to you during the alpha?
So that's
or even early beta.
About like just being like having like the ease of being able to move from one major version to another version, if that's the question.
Yes.
Particularly because so what exactly happens is backward compatibility, obviously as Adobe, again, then we have the obligation to maintain backward compatibility as much as possible. So you'll see even in documentation for things where let's say CF compat, the encryption algorithm changed, right? And then we said if people want to continue using the encryption algorithm as before, they can through a flag. But we do not recommend that. We have
now is that was talked about being deprecated. Is that actually being deprecated in 2025?
So deprecated still means that we have to keep it in the build, and then we have to maintain it for 3 years before it gets removed.
Oh.
So 3 years, as in 3 releases before it gets moved. So it could be more number of years as well. So and then we cannot break it. So every time we have any change coming in there, we have to make sure that we are accounting for the fact that there is no issue with regards to that previous implementation, and then release something. So that introduces a lot of challenges also, because how do we like continue to like sustain and keep the previous features intact while the system's kind of moving towards a newer and a better method of doing things, but we still have to support the customer base that's going to take time to update their codes.
That goes probably true for implicit scope checking as well, as I can imagine that was pretty contentious with several folks.
Yeah.
But
I'm going out and saying we're not removing the JVM flag yet, because we want people to be able to adopt the CF25 release smoothly. And there's lines and lines of code that people have written. It's a controversial statement I just made here. The whole deal is obviously it's a simple thing. If the platform as such does not, obviously gives you the ability to not use something like that and flag an error for not scoping your variables. But if you're in a situation where you don't have a choice, then the platform is continuing to support the JVM flag.
I'm on the stop flag train, so let's get it going. Yeah.
So me and Brian are going to have a debate. It looks like Brian, you can go forward and put your point forward about
I'm the big scoping issue.
You're saying drop the flag, Brian?
Yeah, so it's a joke, but obviously I know a lot of legacy apps are probably impacted by it, but it's really, to me, a critical item that should be addressed in any type of roadmap for a dev team, right? Like, it's just scoping in general it's not a new thing. That's what I think is the funny part of some of the arguments that I've heard. It's like, oh, they rolled out a new feature. I'm like, scoping has always been probably best practice, but it to me, it's a tricky point. I don't work for Adobe, obviously, so I can say it, but it's part of the modernization of the code is the adoption of the modern principles outside of CF, right? And I think that's a challenging part sometimes that we run into, and I see it with some of the legacy code bases and teams that I work with. It's that reluctance and fear just to pull it in, and even things that seem as minuscule as a scope cause other kinds of issues. You get into threading issues, you get in, and not just a security risk, but not properly using variables and then moving into CFCs, and it causes all kinds of potential issues with threading, which is a much larger problem. And if you've got fear of moving and scoping your code, I can only imagine the amount of angst it would cause with somebody dealing with a threading issue. Like, that's getting to Ben's point, that's low level, right? Like, you're getting into what ColdFusion, obfuscates from you, becomes a problem that you really do need to dig into. And so I think, it perpetuates the idea of, I get the backwards compatibility. I'm sympathetic on that side because I've dealt with it. But at the same time, I think it's just part of moving the needle and trying to grow the platform. If you don't have a date to work towards, then people aren't going to make the change, right? And I think that's tough. So,
yeah, 3 years. When I heard deprecated, I thought that was like gone, not like.
If you read the documentation, it says deprecated, then deprecated, unsupported, and then removed. So
okay,
that's the cycle.
Okay.
And we pretty much follow it for most. However, if there's something so sometimes decisions have to be made about certain things to be removed as well. And obviously that's why it's also it's published in the beta for customers to come in and take a look and then tell us if there's an issue, if we had to remove something. But obviously there's a process, which is the recommended process is it goes through 3 major releases before it's out.
So Ryan, is Nextbyte going to adopt a 3-year deprecation plan for their SOAs on future?
We highly recommend, and we actively encourage every customer to get on the most recent update. Oh, we just lost Charvi. Oh, I was thinking we're getting into that touchy subject, so she disappeared. She's like, no, I won't be on video talking about it.
Going into a tunnel.
But no, and I've actually done podcasts with Charlie recently, and we were talking about how we highly recommend people do not use that flag, because there's an active description of how to exploit you.
As a developer and somebody who would want to do things correctly, I'm very much behind the idea of what Brian is saying, and obviously what Charlie is also saying, and why the community did not actually have a good a big pushback on even saying that when we announce saying that we will probably make a decision on deprecating it in the next release, or removing it in the next release. Actually, that's what we thought. But when we got in the conference, we specifically had customers come in and speak about it, and those are the ones who are probably not active in the community as much, because, well, that's how it is. And then how do you continue to support the backward compatibility? And then to answer your question, how do you make sure that migration from one release to another is seamless for people, mostly?
I think in post-production, we'll cut out that part of the podcast so that our customers don't know that it's being left around for 3 years. So the upgrade.
That doesn't apply to this one. I told you, there are deviations that we take sometimes.
Charvi's gonna want the black screen with the face and the robot background to mask her identity.
I just wanted to get that feature back into the frame. So.
All right. I have to take off in a few minutes. I just wanted to say one of the other things that I was very excited to see in the beta documentation is that there's now going to be a way to provision SSL certificates for ColdFusion itself, which, I mean, I'm not a server guy, so forgive me if this is something that's just existed for a long time, but that's always been a huge constraint for me in a local development environment, where in order to do my SSL stuff, I have to get an Nginx container in front of my ColdFusion container, and I have to mount volumes and expose ports and do, the web connectors. If I can have SSL just work out of the box in ColdFusion, then it just greatly simplifies my development workflow. So I was super, super excited to see that in the notes.
I would actually just want to pitch in and say, this is exactly where you were saying, where developers have a call and then they just go ahead and do things, right? So what happened was they were looking at this problem that customers had to do when they would get in the calls with customers to support them for some of the other requirements, and they realized that, well, if it was there in the application server itself, right, in the admin page where they could have a UI to configure. And that's a very ColdFusion unique way of doing things, again, right? Because we have that CF admin, which is very unique to ColdFusion. So adding that into the UI was something that was a decision of that sorts, and then they went ahead with it and then implemented it.
Nice. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think they just did did they just do the webinar about that one? I think Charlie was mentioning.
Yeah, this time around we introduced.
There's an extra step. So for those who've not watched the webinar on it, watch that. I think Charlie even put it in an enhancement request. Something with ports. I was doing two things at once, and I know Charlie.
Yeah, something that where you have to specify the port into a file still. So then but we'll take a look based on what Charlie's reported. But one thing that I just want to point out is we've not had specific webinars on stability and security earlier, and this time around we went ahead and did that because it's such an important thing for our customers. Actually, it is important for them to understand how the platform is continuing to be maintained, or what are the features that are getting introduced, which are important from a security perspective, or when you're building applications also, what new features have come in that are going to help you build more secure applications. So that talk kind of touched on all those three subjects, and it's an important one. So we introduced that also into the beta webinars this time around.
Very cool. All right, yeah. I'm going to quietly drop. Sorry, I have to get to another call. But Charvi, it was great having you on. Brian, thank you so much for joining. I'll let you guys keep going.
All right, continue rocking out.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, ColdFusion is like this, right? We should have that lightning thing also going. Maybe.
Oh yeah. So Charvi, we were talking earlier. So you do all your customer interviews. You look at the feature requests. You have your developers do all this. They come up with the features. They build the release, and even before alpha, you guys do some of your own bug testing. Is that right? You guys do like bug bashes internally. How does that work?
All right. So we have a bug bash. We have a development team. We have a quality engineering team. And then we have separate bug bashes for both the development and the quality engineering teams. And those are intended to make sure that obviously a lot of bugs come into the system, right? From internal testing as well. And sometimes they're deprioritized to get the release out because they're not as pressing or hard. But then it's important to clean up as well. Clean up in the sense, before we get to the release, the next major version, we need to make sure that there's stability on the platform intact. And one of the exciting ways in which we enable that within the team is to do it in a fun and a gamified way where we have a bug bash. So a bug bash is quash as many bugs as you can. And then the teams are between the teams are divided. And then, you have more senior developers and the combination of senior to junior developers coming together in separate teams. And then it runs over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. And then, it's all about the entire team is just focused on quashing as many bugs as possible in that period.
Now, Brian, on a Semify standpoint, do you guys do something similar where you guys have little internal bug bashes to try and find stuff and gamify it?
Yeah, so actually, it's a great question hits close to home here as of recent. I think the hardest thing to me with identifying bugs is the visualization. And what I mean by that is really understanding and trapping what's going on in your system without it being reported. I like to take the mantra of I like to report to a user that I know that they had an issue and that we're actively working on it before they can even get a defect ticket in. We have revamped some of our underlying workflows on how we're starting to handle and become a bit more aggressive on exceptions or defects. Even how we get it reported, what the SOAs are on it, and then even carved out time during the week, what we even kind of refer to as an on-call bug engineer who's constantly monitoring for any kind of higher urgent tickets that do come in. But, I think, bugs are a funny thing because you can measure all the metrics you want with it and defects and see where you have ebb and flows. And I know what the industry standard, you're supposed to maybe have ideally less than or right at around 10% of your total engineering time during the year spent on defects. But I find that number probably very difficult to achieve. But you can start to see where things can get out of line. And that's why I think the visibility part of it is so important. If you can get insight early and get a snapshot of that data as much as you can into the developer's hands, where the context is a lot easier for them to execute and make decisions. I think that really helps, because you can put all the processes you want in place. You can get dedicated people to working bug tickets. You can have an on-call person, but really it always comes back to me is understanding where you have your problems in your infrastructure, your applications, and then making very quick decisions on it and trying to get to the root of the problem and not just fixing a bug to create another bug, which is always a potential risk if you're not fully certain where the issue is. Yeah.
And I will say, so we had a good conversation on another one of our Ben and Ryan shows about bug bashes, and we joked that we were talking to Ben, because Ben who had dropped off of the call, they had bug bashes at Envision, and I joked with him like, hey, do developers leave bugs in the software knowing that they can just fix them and get like credit for their contest? And he's like, no, people would never do that. And during pre-show, I threw that out to Charvi. So those listening on here, Charvi, how do you guys prevent that? Because you guys did a smart twist to it to prevent, probably not to just do this, but it does have a side effect of you guys can't leave bugs in there because why?
Yeah, so you have to understand that bug bash is an exciting way to like quash bugs, but obviously what Brian explained is there's like a process, right? So the bug would have gone through triaging. The support team, Adobe also has a front-facing support team, which triages before it is reported. There's like a lot of triaging that's done before it's reported, and once it's reported, there's triaging done to understand that the criticality of the issue, and also like converse with the customers to exactly identify a repro case for it and things like that. And then post that, it's into the system, and then it makes you the bug bash. Now, people who worked on it have an advantage, right? That's one. But obviously, like there's the negative case where maybe somebody's left a bug, and it'll come to them during the bug bash, and they would be like, oh, we've quashed so many. I mean, we didn't really think of it, but then it was more like we have a randomized way of assigning issues to people. So in fact, there's sometimes like, pushback, even in the sense like if certain teams get like a bad bug, and they're like, I mean, obviously they have to live with the bad bug. But then, yeah, so it's a random process of assigning those bugs and handling them. So,
yes. Sorry.
Which is possible.
Similar to those lines, I painted this picture of visualizations and data and insight, but it's funny if in the wrong hands, it could be interpreted differently if there's no context. And the story I have on that is worked at a place where there's a large development team, and somehow the data, the metrics that were actually very useful in certain hands were interpreted as a race to the top. Like, oh, we just looked at the number of scripts that developer A pushed and developer B, and developer A is knocking it out of the park. He's or she's got 3,000 scripts for this quarter, and it's just absolutely amazing. But if you dig into the details of that a little bit, you get some context wrapped around it. 70% of the scripts were bug fixes, and the bug fixes were the same bugs created by the developer. So it really is.
They were double dipping.
It was, and it was almost not necessarily planted, but the rate to just hit a metric and fix a bug created more and more bugs. And I think that's why, you can put a process into place and you can have the squashing events and pause all work for a week and get your queue back down to zero. But my experience with that is if you don't have that clear insight of really where the problems are coming and even where the lion's share is coming from, your bug problem never really gets addressed. And, at that point when I was there, we saw bugs ranging to the 130,000, 140,000 a month. And that number we were able to get dwindled down to just a couple thousand over the course of these massive applications. And so really, I credit it to not necessarily the bug bashing, but really getting insight into where your problems exist. And it really does kind of tell a story on its own when you get that level of detail.
You can take credit, Brian. You can be like, I give credit to my leadership. I came in there.
Brian is leadership.
One man. It takes an entire team.
So Charvi, we have bug bash during the pre-alpha, during just your development phases, but this year during beta, you guys are doing like a bug bash or some kind of contest to encourage feedback. What are you guys doing with that?
All right. So for beta, we have every week a top contributor thing. A contest, which is, it's for our external users and customers, basically the folks who are joining into the beta program. For them, every week, based on the number of bugs and ERs that they've been logging, we will announce top
And
contributors.
an ER is an enhancement request for those you
Yes,
listening.
an ER is an enhancement request. So if you raise a bug or an enhancement request related to the current release, then yes, you can make it to the top contributor list and win exciting prizes. There's Amazon gift cards worth $100 every week to win.
Wow.
Yes. And I also want to point out, like this, I think that was highlighted in one of your earlier podcasts. Also, there's going to be a hackathon. So if you've been into the beta right now and you are well acquainted with the feature sets, you're going to have an early advantage into the hackathon in March. And obviously, a hackathon is much bigger, so the prizes would be much bigger in that period. Honestly, one more note that I really want to drop in is I understand that customers are always so busy building applications of their own, and it's very hard for them to engage into beta programs like these. But honestly, for their developers, it's so much important to get into these beta programs because they get an idea of what's being built. And also, if they had certain issues that they wanted to simplify on the platform, they would have a viewpoint about it and be able to raise those enhancement requests to us, which then again solves the problem, saying, well, there are only 80 enhancement requests over the last 2 years or so, right? That's which is fair. But I wish there were more and more deeper level ones, not just smaller ones, where deeper level ones also come through. And I think that only happens when the development team is actively involved in being part of these kind of programs.
Yeah, it's great to see the webinars for that. And I think with the new, because it's been already discussed, the licensing changes with 2025 that's coming out. No one's talked about pricing. I mean, Charvi, you're welcome to talk about pricing if you want to here.
Really?
Or not. You don't have to talk about price. So we'll go past that.
I can say this very clearly, that we're moving towards subscription.
Yeah.
The option of moving towards the subscription side of things, and that's what 25 is also going to have. Having said that, about pricing, until it's announced by Adobe, I do not have a sign off to release the pricing just as yet. So that I don't have a sign off on. But then yes, we are moving towards subscription, and obviously when you move towards subscription, you can see a difference with regards to what you were paying for lifetime. That is a given.
Well, the other benefit I was thinking of is that if you participate in the beta and you're providing feedback about enhancement requests, you don't have to wait. Let's say your feature didn't get put into the beta or didn't get put into that release. You don't have to wait till 2027 CF. You have, because of the incremental updates potentially with the subscription model, it could go into a release, just a random release coming later in 2025.
So that's exactly why 25, you'll see a lot of cleanup activity that's gone on. Even in the deprecation list, you will see a lot of cleanup work being done. And then making sure that the stabilization of the platform was very much a priority, as much as building new things. And that is particularly because while we're now moving at a higher velocity of wanting to do more frequent releases, it's also about getting a faster turnaround time on all the patches, hotfixes, bugs that we fix along the way, which are breaking changes as such, which cannot be introduced in a minor update over a major version. And then also when we want to build something new and we want to test the market out for it, it's easier for us. For example, let's look at an AI framework, right? How do we test whether this is going to work or not? So we're going to release something. We're going to see if people are going to be able to adopt and build things out of those functions. And if they are, then well, they have an early time to adopt. And we also have a way to get things sooner to them to be able to test those things out and also get features out for them. So
yeah, I think with AI, I mean, not to go back to this we talked about in the very beginning, but having that kind of store out there or that community involvement could be a key item, because there's so many enhancements that are new innovations coming with AI that are out all the time, and it's hard for a company like Adobe to stay on top of all those and to even pick a winner to kind of where to put your time. But if people want to do small projects and kind of get involvement, and even if you can monetize it, that'd be amazing. Kind of a platform to do that. Then you may encourage more of that ecosystem.
Yeah, but also like, the kind of versioning changes on the APIs on the AI side, then you have to like make sure that you are also on the latest and the greatest.
Yeah.
So then there's work cut out there as well. And that means, again, like as things are moving so fast, it's important to have a more frequent release cycle to address that too. So we can't just be like tied in with the ways things were before.
Charvi, I have to ask, what is the plan with the API manager?
What's the plan with the API manager?
Insight to that? Yep.
Did you? So Brian, you recently filled out the survey that I sent out, right?
I did, and sent you a list.
I want more people.
More.
Because I wanted those people before you sent me out the list. So Ryan, that's an action item on you as well, because I did mail to you, I think Dakota.
I sent you back. Yep.
Dakota. Yeah.
So you want more feedback on API Manager? Folks
who are using API Manager, how they're using and what's their volume usage, so that we can continue supporting the platform.
Yeah, I've talked to. I saw something about that where there are other API managers out there, but they're just more expensive.
Yes,
and so you're having to pay a lot for what you, and one of my earpieces just went out, so I'm going to plug it into charge here.
If you were to like just look at the charges that are there.
Yeah.
There's also a complexity level too. So depending on the path you go, I think the learning curve can be a little steep. So the simplicity of the API manager is part of what I thought was the strong selling point. Was it's pretty easy to get it up and running, and it's, to me, fairly bare bones, which is a good thing. You didn't add a lot of overhead and complexity, and almost I think some of the products out there added a crutch to where different things with logic and could be applied to an incoming request, where it kind of made you sticky, right? Like you didn't really have any options to come off the product with certain integration styles that were done with, treating it more than just a proxy into your back services. And it's a wonderful product. I mean, I've obviously stood behind it a long time, but I know it hasn't had a refresh in a while. That's what I ask. And it is, to me, still works quite well. And it's a very easy way to at least get some security and monitoring in front of your API calls. If anything, it's just a good first step.
Just to give you a background and context also on this, Brian, actually, I've been interviewing, I think I'm into my 4th interview now for the API manager usage with customers. And also, like, I released a survey out there, and I reached out to maybe 20 or 30 odd people who had reached out to us for one of the other queries around API manager into our support channels. The one thing that, I mean, from a volume and like what the product can do, there are customers who've also using it for like 250 million plus requests per month, effectively. So the platform as such supports important use cases for you. And then it can handle the workload very well as well. And it comes completely, if you have a ColdFusion subscription, you have access to the API manager automatically. So from that perspective, it, from a utility side of or point of view, is very good. I just feel like, I'm just like intrigued as to like, where is the adoption and why is the adoption not kicking in? I did see like maybe, I have to hear back from some folks also. So I actually have a complaint as well. So I think like when we reach out, we don't get responses from people. There are a few people obviously who respond back and then, tell us about like things that they're building with it and things like that. It's just that, the kind of responses that we want from people to like, continue to understand the usage, that I did not receive. So I am trying. So if you see almost all my talks, I'll have like a page and would say, my small ask is to like, give me more feedback. When I reach out, please do tell me, because it's such an important platform for some of the customers. If the platform was not to be supported, it would break their applications. And also from a utility point of view, the API manager is pretty much useful for anyone and everyone, because it's a way in which you can like just have a better way to design your backend, right? Host the API on the manager, and then consumption can happen from the API. So it's not just a customer-facing API management tool. It's also like from a perspective of when you're building a backend, it's just a more organized way of like hosting your APIs for usage between different systems. So I feel that, from that point of view, I would like to see more adoption come through, or people telling us how their usage has been. So I hope maybe if anyone's watching this podcast and using API Manager, and I did reach out to them and they did not respond to me, please do, so that we can continue to do the maintenance work. And also, if we see the good adoption coming through, then also building onto the tool.
Yeah, I didn't say if real quick, if anyone's not using it because of a limitation, also let her know, because that'd be good feedback as well. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, so I think the education side of it. Sorry, Brian. One thing that I just wanted to add. So Brian himself did the education part, the certification courses, the videos for API Manager now. So I think if there's any lack of knowledge with regards to how to use the API Manager, so while there's a documentation for it, but obviously the course videos should help as well. So the certification videos should help with that.
Yeah, and I totally understand there needs to be engagement and adoption on the platform to continue to spend dollars on development and feature enhancements, everything else like that. The business case of it, I'm totally sympathetic towards Adobe. I do wonder, over the years, I've tried to help a lot of people with the platform, and I used to just think it was this feeling of not wanting to adopt the tool because they didn't really understand it. And I think that was part of it, but it was more or less they didn't understand the value that it added to their ecosystem. And then if you go even a level deeper, I think, where I believe some of the concerns or just even the lack of adoption of the product, I think it stems back to really not fully understanding REST APIs and the proper protection that the API manager offers. Either it's through SOAs to keep your services from getting slammed with too many requests, or the security features that are built in, which I don't think probably very small percent of people even know that. Right. Yeah. And so if you don't have the concept of value, I think it's very hard to want to adopt it. But then even if you go even a deeper level there, it's even understanding the architectural principles of REST, right? Like what the real benefit is that this proxy does provide to you. So I don't think there's an easy solve for it, because it's probably a mixed bag of use cases here of why people would either not jump on board with it or not. But from my experience, what I've seen is it's really, you almost have to sell the REST side of it first. And then once they really start to unlearn some of those foundational items, and they're like, oh, okay, now I understand completely why I would do this. Because the questions that I received, and it's the most prominent one over the years, why would I put anything in front of my REST APIs that adds latency? And it's an excellent question, but it can be very easily answered with 4 or 5 talking points. And if you really look at, I've been on that million side of the request per day on that platform, the latency average is around 4 milliseconds, as compared to some of the other products where we've seen where they have policy management, directory management that comes over top. You're looking at like 150 to 200 millisecond latency, which at that point, if you have extreme SOAs with a partnership, I totally get it. But again, I think it's a chain reaction of knowledge that's required to get to a successful adoption. I do wonder if that hinders some of that, integration into people's ecosystems.
Does your training go into that? What you just talked about is getting people, encouraging them to get into REST?
It does to some level. It's really the training that Charvi's referring to, or some instructional videos that we did on real basic, like how to install the API manager, and then some of the very high level features. Unfortunately, it's very limited just because the product is vast. Like one of the things I shared with, Kishore and Charvi and Mark when we were going through that was, you could probably have 100 videos on that product alone, because you could go into, even I found myself going into a rabbit hole, like, well, I got to really include this because it's kind of required. So what I did do as part of the training was to make sure to cover, at least to some detail, the native REST creation in ColdFusion. So it does walk through that, because if you're not using any type of a framework, ColdFusion has a very easy way to create REST endpoints directly through the application CFC, or you can register it directly through the admin. But with just a couple tag settings or attribute settings on methods, you can turn what would just be native normal CF code into a fairly robust REST endpoint. And the advantage of the API manager is once you register that in the ColdFusion ecosystem, there's a direct import option. So it's actually very easy. If they can understand the REST part of it, then the migration and the adoption of that product is actually pretty much button clicks, right? Like there's really not a lot of complexity to it. So there's a little bit of coverage in there, but again, we've done some other, Adobe's been very gracious in wanting to support some of the ideas I've had on the API integrations and everything else. We've done trainings, we've done seminars, we've got a lot of materials, but I think that first hurdle is just getting more and more folks to adopt those modern concepts and native options that exist in ColdFusion, because I think that's where you actually need to start.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of take somebody who's not using that right now and to and to walk them through that. Okay, look, here's how easy it is to convert you, and kind of show that demo, and then that could be an encouragement to people. It's just kind of see how easy that is.
So Ryan, actually, to add to that point, when I went to the customer interviews this time around, I said, I want to do case studies with you because each application use case is going to be slightly more unique than the other one. For example, some of them are going to use it for, let's say, customer-facing side, or some of them have like a multi-tenant system. So then, they're going to use the multi-tenancy feature of the API manager and then, host their APIs that way. And provide the ability for their customers to be able to access that data from the multi-tenancy feature that's there. There are customers who are using it for not just for like internal ColdFusion applications, but also if a ColdFusion application has to talk to another application on a different tech stack, then they're using it for that as well. So I wanted to do case studies with them so that, what's going to happen is it's a more of a show and tell and also like real life use cases coming in. And then when people see that, maybe they understand that there's value in doing that for their own systems as well. So probably that's one way to go if we see that if that could drive the adoption for our users and our ecosystem as such. So that's one thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah, you touched on a big point there because it's not even if the API manager from Adobe is your front end proxy for your REST endpoints into ColdFusion, ColdFusion doesn't even have to be talking to a different tech stack for that to be leveraged. And I've seen this, I've been part of this with multiple spots, but it is just a proxy to any tech stack. So I'd be very clear on that point with people because I think that's also a misunderstanding. They might be running PHP or Python or .NET. And they're like, well, we can't use it because we're not a primary CF shop. And I'm like, no, it is nothing more than a mere proxy into your system. So I have seen it multiple times and been part of those integrations where it's gone to a multitude of different tech stacks with zero issues and completely obfuscates what you're using under the hood. So you could have 7 different tech stacks making up your API ecosystem. It all goes through one point and the user's none the wiser, or the consumer. So it's really a very simplistic thing to put up as a front controller for anything going into your ecosystem.
This is the power of the Ben and Ryan show. Is that we go into tangents all over the place, and so we'll this will be a good that'll be a good segment for us to kind of for you guys. I'll take or my team will take the videos and they'll break it out into smaller chunks as well. And so we may put out something just on the API manager so people can listen. They're curious about just the discussion on API manager without having to listen to. Not there's anything wrong with a now 78-minute podcast, but so they don't have to listen to the first 60 minutes if they just want the API manager piece.
We ran before we maybe decide to close on things and stuff like that. But I want to make two requests. One obviously about the beta program. I did speak to customers. I feel that there's a lot of community interactions that happen during beta. I really love Adobe's customers to actually enable their developers to be able to join the beta program, because when they want to develop newer applications and they have more requests that are coming in, we can see that come through during the beta. Also, as application developers, they have different points of view that can come in and then give us more feedback on like how we build things. So I would really love for them to come in and join the beta. And we've taken special efforts this time around to make sure we've done deep dive webinars. We are hosting all the demo codes that we've built through the new functions and features on a public Git. So it's easier for you to just consume and see how it's used. Maybe just use the code as is and then run it and then see what it's doing. That itself is like, a starting point for you. So we've done those things to enable people to like, work with the beta a lot more easier this time around. But I just hope more and more people join in so that we can get the value of feedback coming into us from that channel. And the other ask that I have is very much the tracker side, right? When we decided into the pre-show, when we're doing, what do we want to talk about, is we are looking at 26 planning now, as in like, the next release planning. And when we look at that, we want more customers to come in and think more deeply about what they would need. Because if that were to happen, then it's easier for us to like, approach it versus we having to like reach out for interviews into the dark to understand, probably we could do this. It'd be nice to like, have GraphQL in the product because it's a good technology to have. It would be so much more interesting to see, you know what, in PDF manipulation, we have so many functions and I wish I had that. So then we have a much richer library for PDF manipulations. But if that were to come in from our customers, that would be so much nice.
And Charvi, how important is it for the CF community to also attend any of the summits that you have? You have Summit East, you have Summit West in Vegas.
Let me quickly touch base. We are trying to have a very active summit calendar year round, pretty much so that we can get more education on the product out and also more networking to be happening as you are part of those. So it's one thing to have like remote learning going for you, but it's another to like actually attend conferences and talks and then, learn from people and then network people. And some of the, so just to give you an example, like we have, for this customer advisory board itself, like I was trying to get something done remotely from here during the East Summit. And I don't think it was so much of a success as much as like when we had the actual sit downs in the summit with customers when they were like talking to us directly. So now there's like a relationship build that we can continue on and have those advisory boards set up, right? So that's one aspect. But even for like, peer interactions that happen, which is so much more beneficial. I've seen people exchange ideas. I've seen people get like more work. I've seen people like, think about things very differently when they've been part of these in-person summits. And what we've tried to do is, there's a summit in East, you can come in there. There's a summit in the West in Vegas every year. Those are the set dates. Typically the dates are kind of like around the same time around. So then it's easier for you to also plan around that time. And if you've, for some reason, not been able to make it to either of the physical in-person summits, then we also host online summit. And India Summit is also there for the developers in India. And last time around, we did a summit for the Malaysian developers as well. So we did host that. Some of the folks traveled. I had to do the talks remotely. But we did try to have all of the engagement going more so because the value of attending in-person events or these summits is a lot more versus, doing things in silos and then not being able to figure out a lot with the platform by yourself.
Yeah, something you could even do, and I think there was talk about this because I've seen like the birds of a feather type events at summits before of other people, but to have like lunch or something, have a couple have a few tables set up to say, hey, here's my API manager table. If you want to engage in a conversation about API manager, and not every table has to have a topic, but you could say, hey, here's my API manager table, and maybe Brian's loving API manager. He may sit there the whole time and just engage in conversations about API manager, or someone can come in because lunch is long. Someone can come in for a few minutes, talk API manager, and then go out to another table if they want to talk about another feature out there. But that could be another good way for you guys to engage. Sure,
yeah, definitely an interesting idea. We used to have like a CF expert table where it's just not Adobe engineers, but it's also like folks from the CF community sitting on the table at any point, manning the table for people who have questions to ask. So that culture is there in the summits. But it's interesting to actually do specific ideas as well to get the feedback in. So yeah, that's where we have to be extremely creative with our community, where we were like come up with ideas to like get the feedback in. I wish we didn't have to be so creative. I wish like people use the tracker a lot more.
I will volunteer Dakota, our CTO, to be at the table for performance tuning. And if you have a table about cloud hosting, we'll be there as well.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we're already volunteer. If nothing else, we'll bring our own signs and just say, hey, at this table, we're going to talk about this stuff. We'll do grassroots.
That's nice, Ryan. Ryan, I want to acknowledge like the kind of energy that you guys bring to the conference. Like right from the first time, like I think when Ryan came and he sported like a mohawk, which was like a grass mohawk, and you literally could see Ryan from like maybe 50 feet from there. And you're like, okay, I am expired. But obviously, like it's also from a perspective of making a splash and being so active into the community, and then wanting to do things that kind of shows. So I would just want to acknowledge, and of course, Brian, which is pretty much the flag bearer of ColdFusion out there. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I got to be inspired by all the things Brian did. I mean, watching him and
yeah, Brian's
out there. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, everyone listening, watching, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Charvi, for joining us today. Thank you, Ben, who had to jump off to a call. Wow, that was a half an hour ago that he left the conversation. So we've been having an amazing, engaging conversation. Typical Ben and Ryan show fashion. Jumped off a bunch of tangents. I think Brian was excited. He got to hit up Charvi with some things that it was on his mind. So he got some extra benefit from this. But everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Any final words at all? And we've talked about various topics. Brian, if people want to find you or find more information about Semify, how do they find you?
Really easily for Semify, www.semify.com. And then for me, I'm on LinkedIn. Brian Sappey is my handle on LinkedIn, and then my domain, which my website, which needs to be updated. The landscaper has the worst yard in the neighborhood, and so does the guy that knows how to build a website has one of the worst websites. But briansappey.com if you want information. But Ryan, thank you very much for doing this. I think it's a great outreach for ColdFusion in the community, and I really do applaud you for organizing this, and thank you for the invite.
Yeah, I like the format of bringing customers in to kind of talk about stuff. So we may, I know Charvi, you guys are doing your own customer roundtables, but we may do other things here just to kind of continue conversations around CF and encouraging that engagement. Brian,
because like we'd also get some inputs from there, because if we hear those conversations about their applications, what they're building, how they're building things and things like that, I think that could be like things for us to like take notes from as well. So that'd be interesting to see, definitely.
And Brian, for those who don't know Semify, do you have a 20-second, 30-second just plug on Semify?
Yeah, SEO, white labeling options. We cover quite a bit, everything from content generation to technical SEO engagements, and we can support just about anybody. So I definitely would encourage anyone that has any need of assistance with their SEO campaigns or efforts. Definitely, we're here to help. So we are very we're built for scale, and we're built to help anybody at this point. So I definitely would encourage anyone to give us a call, and we're happy to have a conversation. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brian. Charvi, any last final words for everybody? I mean, everyone knows Adobe, so you don't have to plug them.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I did have my segments about like the 2 asks that I had, which is 1, please join the beta, and 2, please be a lot more active on giving us feedback in terms of what you need. So that's pretty much my closing remarks on like how I would want to close things.
And I will end with one thing. If you are on any of these social media platforms, we have a new hashtag.
Oh yeah.
So
this.
So I wish ColdFusion had this. So if you are out there and you're just and you see something and you use the tracker, definitely use the tracker. But if you happen to just be out there and mentioning a feature you want or something in social media, hashtag I wish ColdFusion had this.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add one remark there, because it's interesting. So the team was snooping into the community platforms also. And if you look at the stability and security talk, you will see that they've actually built a feature. It was some issue with the Firefox header that they had to fix because it was conflicting with the default header of ColdFusion also. So that they got to know that information from the community, and then they could fix it. It's hard to kind of keep a track of all the chatter that's there in the community, but then the team did go ahead and do that initiative. But now that we have a dedicated hashtag, it's going to be so much easier to track everything. So ColdFusion had this hashtag.
There we go. You heard it. We're launching it now today. Basically before the podcast actually launches to the public. But yeah, so thank you guys very much for joining us. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will do many more of these. So thank you guys very much. And as my co-host Ben always says, cheers, guys.
Okay, cheers. Cheers to ColdFusion.
Cheers.